Alright, go ahead.
Hi everyone, can you guys hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you.
In my room.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So today we're going to talk to you about a rehabilitation plan for a 50-year-old firefighter with posterior glenohumeral impingement. So first I'm going to kind of talk to you about the basics of it. So, okay, so basically a 50-year-old firefighter with posterior glenohumeral instability. Sorry, this puppy. And he presents with right shoulder pain, which is his dominant shoulder and dominant arm, decreased glenohumeral range of motion, decreased strength, decreased glenohumeral endurance. He does have comorbid scapular dyskinesis in his right arm, decreased glenohumeral stability, poor core stability, and poor thoracic mobility. So basically the patient presents with his limitations and goals. He has pain with overhead activities of daily living, which involve putting shampoo on his head, putting the dishes away up in the cabinets, and yard work. In addition, one of the things that he complains of is he's unable to play baseball or catch with his grandson. Typically, he does this over the weekends, and he would like to be able to do this. Also, he is unable to complete overhead tasks while working as a firefighter. This includes putting his gear on, such as his oxygen tank and his helmet, opening the truck doors, swinging an axe, and carrying or holding a hose up above his head. So we're going to basically go over the rehabilitation impairments and kind of go over like at least one progression for each impairment. So I'll have Ashley go ahead first.
Alright guys, so I'm going to start with range of motion. I'm going to attempt to use a screen sharing technique here so you guys can see what I'm talking about. I decided to essentially create a home exercise program to show you guys some of the progressions that we're going to use. So for range of motion, we're starting with active assisted range of motion. And you can see an example here using a wand or, you know, some type of tubing so the patient can help themselves get through the range of motion. And another example down here, number 2, you can see the patient working on their external range of motion. And an alternative option is to use a pulley system that you can see here in phase 3. Obviously, range of motion is one of the first things that we want to restore to this patient before focusing on strength and functional activities. A fourth example here is using a towel to work on internal rotation as well. So just so you can see, these are things that you can use in your own clinic, and then you can also have the patient do it at home to help work on that range of motion. Moving past active assisted range of motion, we're going to have the patient or clinician assisted range of motion. Again, here are a few examples, as you all know from your own clinical practice, that the clinician can really help the patient reach that end range of motion and to improve range of motion. These are all examples of passive range of motion, obviously, because a clinician is trying to help aid that patient gain that extra range of motion that we're looking for. And then ultimately we're going to move on to active range of motion. As you can see here, we're using the table as kind of a buffer to help protect the range of motion that we want them to work through. And you can progress this further into the full range of motion and into gravity-dependent range of motion positions. And then finally, another skill, I guess, to help assist with your range of motion is to do MOBs. These are examples of self-MOBs for the patient to do at home or in the clinic, just to help increase that range of motion and to get ultimately as far as you want to go. The next thing I'm going to focus on is core. Core is a big thing with firefighters. They have intense work. They're doing a lot of things overhead. They're fighting fires. They're carrying a lot of weight. So we really wanted to focus on the core strength and core stability. And again, this is just to help show some of the progressions that we worked on in our actual document. As you can see here, we're just starting on a basic quadruped position. The patient is working on getting that motion, activating the pelvic floor, activating their abdominals, their back, just so they can actually understand what kind of motion they're supposed to be, experiencing and how to contract those muscles. Then we're going to progress on to a prone Superman, again activating some more of those back muscles, keeping the core tight, lifting their legs and arms off the floor, and then progressing into a modified front plank. And again, these are just to show some of the progressions that we came up with into a regular plank, and then up into here with a plank with a step, or having the patient actually move. And the third thing we worked on is side planks. Again, we started with a basic, side plank with a knee bent and modified position, working up to a full side plank, and then finally here with lateral hip adduction, just to change, the environment and to make it more unstable and more difficult. Again, like I said, firefighters do incredibly hard work. They have a lot of extra weight on them when they're working, whether that's, the suit, the oxygen, carrying a fire hose, axes, the whole 9 yards. So really incorporating that core strength will help with taking the load off of the shoulders and using the body more as a system rather than just the extremities. And then finally, going back a little bit to the shoulder again, we're going to look at some stabilization for that comorbid scapular dyskinesis. Again, here we're going to start with basic scap exercises, the rotary position, having the patient learn how to move his scapulas in the correct way. And then we're going to move on to the prone W, prone retractions, very typical exercises that you guys probably utilize in your everyday clinical practice. And we're just starting with the table to assist and control how far the patient can go into their range of motion, and allowing gravity to provide the resistance. And again, after after you get used to this and your patient can progress, you can simply add weights. You can use resistance bands to get different types of, resistance, and really progress your athlete as deemed necessary by your clinical judgment. And then moving on here to step 7, we're going to start with serratus punches. Again, you can start with no weight, just getting them to get their scaps to move the right way, progress to weights. I decided to start here before going into wall push-ups with a plus, just so the patient can really get both of their arms, in step 7, they're working unilaterally or bilaterally if you want, but really getting them to fire the correct muscles before going into a push-up plus against the wall, or ultimately a push-up off the table. And then finally, just some more advanced stabilization techniques is using the body blade. Typically something you're going to use in the clinic because the patient's not going to have a body blade at home, but getting all those muscles to fire at the same time and provide that stabilization. Ultimately, getting them back to work the most effective way possible. I can't get it to stop. Is it back on me? Oh. So that was my 3 parts. Again, we can send you the entire layout of, our whole rehab plan, but instead of making you look through that, intense document, I just wanted to break down some of the general rehabilitation techniques per our impairment and how we want to get our patient back to those goals, starting with being able to do overhead activities of daily living, progressing on to playing catch with his grandson, and finally, ultimately getting him back to work and getting him back to earning that living. I'm now going to pass it off to Devin, and she's going to go on and talk about the next 3 sections.
Hey guys, so my topics were decrease strength, endurance, and increase of neuromuscular control. With strength and endurance with firefighters, it's important because when they're fully, if there are 2 types of firefighter, there's indoor and outdoor. Indoor carries the most equipment, typically because they actually go inside buildings, but their equipment can weigh in total over 100 pounds, and then if you add, like I think the tank itself weighs about 25 or more depending on the person. All the equipment in total weighs about 100 pounds, and axe can vary from 15 to 25. So it's a lot of excess that they have to carry when they're actually doing their job. So with this, it's really important to understand how everything worked and how to affect it. So kind of touching on what Ashley said, a couple of the different progressions that we talked about in our document, you can actually do using for strength. So one that we did is kind of like a core 4, so it's internal, external rotation, punches, and shoulder extension. And you can do that passive, active assisted, limited weight, and then increased weight. So it just depends on where they're at in your rehabilitation cycle. And that also helps with endurance because you can vary how much they actually do. So when you first start, you might only do 3 sets of 5, and then eventually work up to 3 sets of 10 or whatever the case may be. And that can actually have a big effect on endurance as you move forward. And then neuromuscular control. If I'm going to focus just when we talked about swinging the axe and throwing a baseball, because those are the 2 things our patient was really adamant about. If you don't have control over an axe when you swing it, it not only becomes a threat to your safety because you can, that equipment, I've worn it, it's really easy to topple over, which sounds really silly, but it's easy to fall over and put yourself in a dangerous situation. It also can put your fellow firefighters in a dangerous situation if you don't have control of that, because you might be able to injure one of them, and it also puts the people that you're trying to save at risk, because it might take multiple attempts to get through a door as opposed to the 1 or 2 that it needs to actually weaken the structure. And then with throwing a baseball, especially depending on how old a child is, if you don't have that control, you might tire yourself out more quickly, you might overthrow, or even not have the control to put the ball where it needs to be. So particularly with the axe, we did a lot of things where it was an overhead lift, so picking up the ball up over their head and slamming it down. And again, this varies based on where they're at. So you might do this with no weight and just practice on a table getting them through that motion, and then standing up and with weight and actually bringing it down, and then alternating it. So once they've mastered it with both arms, having them lead as if they were holding their axe, to make it more of a functional movement. And then with the baseball, it's kind of like if you're working on like a thrower's 10 kind of progression and just working them through that just to work on getting that control back. This section in particular, a lot of the things are intertwined because without endurance, strength is going to be affected and vice versa. And then also with control, this particular section is kind of like a triangle. It all connects. Without one being successful, you're not really going to get a lot out of the other. And again, like Ashley said, we can send you ours. We go into much more detail with more exercise examples, but it's kind of large and obnoxious. So I'm going to pass it over to Brittany, and she's going to touch up on the next parts.
Hi everyone. I'm going to share on the screen just to show you a couple of pictures. Okay. So my section involves range of motion, glenohumeral stability, and thoracic mobility. So one of the things that was an issue for this patient was the fact that he had scapular dyskinesis, and one of the things that was causing a scapular dyskinesis is the lack of thoracic mobility. So over here on the screen you can see an exercise called the bird dog. So this helps with thoracic mobility, and again you can progress this from on your knees to going into a plank and doing the same exact thing. And this will work on range of motion and stability as well. Also, we focused on thoracic extension, so we progressed this by having the patient start on a soft foam roller such as this below, and then progressing to something such as a PVC pipe or a tennis ball or a baseball, because it's a harder object and it's more specific on the thoracic back. Let me stop screen sharing this. So another thing that I wanted to mention with just general glenohumeral stability, basically just focusing on the range of motions, but doing the, adding basically weight to flexion, extension, abduction, horizontal abduction, anything like that will help with glenohumeral stability, and with the thoracic mobility, like I just showed you. Also performing mobility, so joint mobilizations of the thoracic spine, like we learned in manual therapy, will be very important for this as well. Now, this isn't focused on specifically stability or thoracic mobility, but one of the progressions I wanted to mention with the patient wanting to continually throw the baseball with his grandson, we started with underhand and then we went to overhand. So when we started with underhand, one of the exercises that we performed was using a kettlebell and basically throwing underhand but stopping at 90 degrees and then coming back down eccentrically very slowly. And then we progressed from the kettlebell swing to 90 degrees up to 100 degrees. And then keep going from there, but making sure that you bring the ball down very slowly. And then when progressing to overhead, we would do the thrower's 10 progression, and then continually work on the eccentric movements of the glenohumeral joint. So focusing on using weights and throwing it, but then eccentrically trying to slow that those muscles down the glenohumeral joint to stop the throw and make sure that there is stability in the glenohumeral joint. The last thing that I want to mention is, let me find it. So specifically, some of the progressions that we did included with the joint and the plane of motion. So the plane of motion, we did started with single joint, then multiple joint, and moving to functional. So an example of this is basically doing simple range of motion in single directions, such as flexion, extension, adduction, abduction. Then moving on to a multiple planar, such as scaption, and then doing an axe swing, which is a functional plane of motion. Also, kinetic chain, starting with closed, going to open, then going to variable. And we did kind of combine these things from the beginning to the end. The lever arm is also another thing that I want to mention, starting with a short lever arm, then going to a long lever arm. So an example of this with core stability, starting with a low plank to a high plank, and then using the plank with leg extension, because this increases the lever arm of the body by basically raising those legs up and those arms up. Next is variable muscle contraction, starting isometric and isotonic, and then moving to more functional, using multiple contractions, such as throwing the baseball, starting concentric and eccentrically. And then resistance intensity, of course, is low, high, variable, and then functional. Same thing with the task speed. An example of this is again with the axe swing. Just starting with slow range of motion with weight, slow and controlled. Then doing a med ball slam, so basically slamming the med ball on the ground as fast as possible, and then increasing that to the axe swing, so doing that as fast as possible as well. Another thing that we added was doing PNF exercises. So this will basically utilize tactile input. So starting with this manual input for PNF. So of course having the clinician touch the patient's arms and doing those PNF patterns, and then progressing to no tactile inputs as a progression of this. And then that's really it for range of motion and thoracic mobility.
So like Brittany said, we basically used the progression that Dr. E had sent us in that email. And I had just emailed you guys our original document and then some of those supplemental documents. Again, we were planning a little more on some of the collab technology and sharing that via screen, but we did email that to you, so you do have access to it and you can reflect on it. Do you guys have any questions for us?
Yeah, just general questions. If I look really hard at my notes, the only thing I could find in the short notes was a pink one, and it really didn't write really too well. It's not very bright. It seems like, I mean, it's very thorough, got a lot of exercises. With the plan, was he coming in like X amount of days and doing like different programs with that one? So, like, say he was coming in one day doing core exercises and then shoulder rehab the next day.
So basically just going off of the goals. So doing all those exercises until he reaches a specific... Oh no. Ashley, my Firefox crashed.
Oh.
All right, I'll pick up this one. So we didn't necessarily have, individual days dedicated to, individual goals. We were planning on 2 to 4 visits a week, hopefully, potentially, going with a three times a week goal. And kind of like I showed you, was we were going to send our patient home with some home exercise programs just so they could hopefully stay on top of it. We were shooting for a month to 2 in terms of return to full activity. Again, that's dependent on patient compliance to the home exercise program, their restrictions, their motivations, their co-workers' motivation. Ultimately, since it wasn't really a real patient, we would just have to decide. We would do multifactorial things, work on range of motion and core strength in the same days. There weren't individual days dedicated to certain things.
Okay, yeah, that answers my question. And just like, did you have any like metrics for progression, like a prom or anything like that?
Yeah, we actually have several proms and stuff in our goals. Obviously, pain is one of the most important ones, and then also using, just standardized measures in terms of range of motion to progress, from active assisted to active range of motion, but also using things. We had the DASH and the Western Ontario Stability Index, and then also using just your general test measures like your sulcus sign or your apprehension, just to see if, the clinician's tests are showing more stability within the shoulder. So yeah, we did have a variety of those in our actual document.
Right. And for the scapular dyskinesis, did you have any like W rows or 45-degree rows? The reason I ask is like there's some of the research that I found in some of the CEU classes I've done with the Andrews Clinic said there's really great EMG evidence that they really activate the lower trap, and it should be done be done in conjunction with serratus anterior strengthening to like sort of get that scap back down. Did you?
Yeah, we had I's, Y's, T's, W's, and prone back burners all in there.
And now, just when you're talking, I was just thinking of like just things off the top of my head, especially with like neuromuscular control. I went to one class. I think it was actually a CSCS course in Georgia. It was like with the regional thing. They had an athletic trainer there talking about neuromuscular control. He used to work with baseball pitchers, and he said he used like he went to like Dollar General and got 2 of those like plastic kid swords, and he would just play with like just basically sword fight with the guys, because he was telling us it does the same thing as having them do like wall circles and everything else, and you can change the intensity and the angle and everything else. That was just sort of one of those things that I thought of. And Brittany, when I seen you do like the sort of the soft toss motion, I thought of like playing cornhole. I was like, how awesome would that be? Like rehab, what are we doing today? We're playing cornhole. Like we're gonna work on some like shoulder, like again, you can, if you think about it, you can vary how much sand's in those bags, and you could really work through that one. Other than that, I thought it was great. It just sort of like when you were talking, I was writing notes. I was like, that sounds pretty cool. And another thing, have you ever seen like a rip trainer, like from TRX, like the big sticks? Like you can just get it and you can start like just tossing. I was thinking about that with the axe. You can do that at different ranges of motion. You can put them on like a Bosu ball, so it gets core involved as well. Again, like when you were talking, it just was making me think. So I guess you did a good job in that part, providing information and everything.
We did. One of the things that we did for the axe was the diagonal pulley swings. That's more functional than using the axe if you're doing it diagonally. You're not going to do it straight down. You're going to have some sort of diagonal movement to it. So we did that as well, increasing the
the weight to that as well.
Awesome.
I've actually worked with firefighters in the past just because that's the world I came from before. And one thing we did just because to work on weight is instead of having them start at some point with the axe, is we actually, because we were a big lacrosse community, they took their kids' lacrosse sticks and we would vary the weight in that because you can replicate a very similar motion with a lacrosse stick as you would with an axe. So it kind of goes off what you were saying and just kind of utilizing what's around you or what you can get for cheap.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Any other questions?
Could someone talk a little bit about the termination of care?
Yeah, so basically we matched our termination of care up with the patient's goals and then the impairments that they reported with. So, hold on, let me just find it here on the... It's going to be the last thing. So the first thing is obviously we want this patient to have full pain-free range of motion. They need to, be able to do activities of daily living, but ultimately return to their job and make a living. And then our strength, we wanted it to be at least 80% compared bilaterally. We utilized the SF-36. We wanted them to have a score of 90 or higher, and a higher score is better in case you forgot. So we wanted them to report 90% satisfaction, essentially, of their own care and how they felt personally on the SF-36. And then we wanted no pain or discomfort with the functional testing, including things of activity, daily living, playing catch with his grandson, and performing axe swings, putting on the weight and the equipment necessary for them to perform his duties as a firefighter.
And of course, it would be ideal for everything to be, completely back to normal, but that's not always going to happen. So we had to pick range of motion, pain, and stability as the main aspects of termination of care, with at least performing his job. That's the most important thing.
And those were also the 4 reported impairments upon initial visit.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else for us?
I don't think I have any more questions.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks for being adaptive. Again, sorry we weren't really planning on this, but I'm glad we could get it done. Look forward to seeing you all on Thursday. I hope, Dustin, you have a safe travel.
Have a safe trip.
And Devin, obviously, I hope that the rest of us can get there okay. It's a little bit closer to home, so thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you guys on Thursday.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.